안녕하세요. 차윤아입니다. 여러분 이태원 클라스라고 아시죠? 이 작품은 여러분들이 많이 드라마로 알고 계시겠지만 원조는 바로 웹툰입니다. 이 작품이 해외 각국에서 번역이 되면서 큰 인기를 얻고 있다고 하는데요. 이 밖에도 많은 작품들이 번역이 되면서 해외에서 많은 사랑을 받고 있다고 합니다. 오늘은 바로 이 웹툰 번역에 대해서 알아보려고 하는데요. 자, 제 옆에 카카오 엔터테인먼트 소속의 레티샤 웰스 선생님 나와 계십니다. 안녕하세요.
Hello, I'm Letitia Wells, and it's a pleasure to be here.
반갑습니다. 자, 먼저 물어보지 않을 수가 없을 것 같은데요. 선생님께서는 카카오 엔터테인먼트 소속의 영어 현지화 관리자로 일을 한다고 들었습니다. 무슨 일을 하는 건지 확 와닿지는 않는데 먼저 소개 좀 부탁드릴게요.
Yes, of course. So I monitor the translation quality of the localization material that comes from KiwiVine. It's a localization subsidiary for Kakao Entertainment. So I also do research into the process, and I also provide manuals and guidance that the freelancers and that the in-house editors use to translate the material.
현지화 매뉴얼이요. 현지화 매뉴얼이 어떻게 만들어지고 또 어떤 내용인지 궁금한데 설명 좀 부탁드릴게요.
Sure, of course. So, if you think about editorial manuals that publishers or newspapers have, our manual is the same thing. We just provide guidance on grammar, sentence structure, phrasing, spelling, those kind of things to keep the translation style consistent. So, the main goal of these manuals is just to ensure that regardless of who is translating and editing our material, the quality will remain the same.
현지화 과정에도 꽤 다양한 부분을 고려해야 되겠군요. 웹툰 번역은 다른 문학 번역이나 영화 번역과는 달리 좀 최근에 생긴 영역이라는 생각이 드는데요. 선생님께서는 어떻게 웹툰 번역을 하게 되셨는지 그 계기가 궁금해요.
So ever since I was younger, I did have an interest in comics and Japanese manga as well. And then when I came to Korea and started studying Korean, I had a difficult time reading Korean books. So I switched to Korean webtoons to learn some more words and more colloquial phrasing. And then after studying Korean, I got into localization. So initially I got into game localization, but I realized it wasn't really where my heart was. And then when I started to see that Korean webtoons were being translated into English, I thought, oh, this would be a good opportunity for me. And so I jumped into that field pretty much right away.
정말 기회가 좋으셨네요. 젊어서 관심이 있었다라면은 언제부터 뭐 한 10대? 20대 말씀이신가요?
With Korean webtoons?
예.
Korean webtoons was in my 20s, so mid-20s.
네.
Yeah. When I was studying Korean at Sogang University, actually, in their language center.
좋아하는 일을 이제 잘할 수 있는 일로 만든 그런 계기가 됐네요.
Yeah, I'm really lucky.
너무 행복한 일인 것 같습니다. 그렇다면 웹툰 번역은 그림이 있기 때문에 또 다른 글 번역을 하는 것과는 좀 차이가 있을 것 같거든요. 웹툰 번역은 어떻게 접근을 해야 될까요?
So webtoons are a new form of content that can't be translated by the same rules that you would follow to translate a book or a movie. So this may seem pretty obvious, but it's really easy to miss what makes webtoons unique. So if you don't understand the important parts of webtoons, then it's not possible to provide a translation that matches with the original. You know, in a popular book written by David Bellos, it's a popular book on translation. It's called Is That a Fish in Your Ear? I really recommend it. He mentions that studying graphic translations is an education in the flexibility of human languages and human minds. So basically, translating for webtoons is a mental exercise. You're translating language and cultural differences while also translating the text and sound effects so that they match the images of the context that you're given. And you have to make sure that all of that fits within the space constraints of the speech bubbles.
정말 여러 가지 공부도 해야 되고 또 연구도 해야 되는 일이 바로 웹툰 번역이 아닐까 싶은데요. 또 텍스트뿐만이 아니라 이미지를 함께 번역을 해야 되기 때문에 더 어려운 작업일 것 같습니다. 일반 텍스트 번역과 다른 점이 있다면 어떤 게 있을까요?
Yes, so for similarities, we are translating from text to text without any audio cues.
소리가 없이 번역을 하는 것은 일반 텍스트 번역과 이제 뭐 공통점이라고 할 수가 있을 텐데 그렇다면 차이점이 있다면 어떤 게 있을까요?
Well, of course, the differences are a lot more. So we do have to consider the images along with the text. And as I said before, the spacing. We have to make sure that it all fits into the speech bubbles. It's also a lot harder to add translation notes because of that lack of space. Also, if you think about how books are released, so books are released usually by volume, but webtoons are released per episode. So it makes it a lot harder to add a translation note. You can't just add one at the end like you might for a novel. And also because webtoons are published weekly, we are unable to translate the whole thing in one sitting before we start publishing. So we have to make sure that we keep the consistency, make sure that character names are the same, place names are the same. They have to all be spelled correctly each time.
정말 어려운 작업들이 많이 있는데 그 중에서도 미처 생각하지 못했던 부분은 말풍선인 것 같아요. 그 공간에 제약이 있다라고 말씀을 해주셨는데 언어마다 길이가 다 다르기 때문에 그걸 또 압축해서 내용을 해치지 않는 선에서 번역을 해 나간다는 것도 쉬운 일은 아닌 것 같습니다. 그런데 이미지가 있다는 점에서 영화 번역과 또 비교를 해볼 수 있을 것 같거든요. 어떤 공통점이 있고 어떤 차이점이 있을까요?
Just like with movies, we are translating the text with the images, so we do have that for context. And the images do sometimes make it a lot easier to translate, but it can also make it harder. So basically, when you have images, you're able to understand the sequences a little bit better, but then you have to make sure that the translation matches what the viewer or reader is seeing.
보이는 게 있기 때문에 어느 정도 좀 번역을 하는데 힌트가 될 수도 있겠네요. 그러면 영화 번역과 웹툰 번역의 차이점은 어떤 게 있을까요?
Oh, there are a lot of differences. So unlike movies, the sequences that go through in webtoons depend on the reading speed of the reader. So they can read at the speed that best matches them.
네, 앞에서 이제 쭉 웹툰 번역이 얼마나 이제 어려운 작업인지 설명을 해주셨는데 그 중에서도 가장 어려웠던 점이 있다면 좀 말씀해 주시겠어요?
Well, there's a lot, but if I had to summarize, conveying humor is really difficult in webtoon translation, especially if there's wordplay involved. So jokes in Korean tend to rely a little bit more on wordplay, which is obviously hard to translate in any language, but also in English. So sometimes we would have to add a translation note to kind of clarify that, or we would have to change the joke completely to match the meaning. So in this example from the webtoon 나를 기억하나요? The winery and the character names are all puns. So we have appeal for appealing. We also have 오마한 for 어마어마하다, which is awesome or amazing. So we decided to actually change the romanization of 오마한 to amazing, so that it could sound a little bit closer to the English word amazing, so that we could kind of keep the same meaning and kind of convey it to the English readers by using a homophone.
네, 말씀하신 것처럼 정말 유머나 유행어나 이런 것들은 웹툰에 굉장히 많이 등장을 하는데 이런 것들을 번역하는 게 정말 어려운 작업이겠네요. 이 밖에도 웹툰에서 특히 번역할 때 어려운 점이 있다면 또 어떤 게 있을까요?
Well, I actually find this part kind of fun, and that is translating the sound effects. So translating the sound effects in a way that the reader can fully understand the action that is happening. So, in Korean, Korean has a lot of culturally accepted onomatopoeia and things I like to call written sounds, but English doesn't have as many. So when we are translating the sound effects, we have to consider first the original Korean meaning, and then we also have to consider the scene and the context, and then we have to pick a translation that matches accordingly. So in this example, this is from 나를 기억하나요? You'll see that the sound effect is 맴치. So a direct translation of this would be ripped heart, right? But a translation like that, it just wouldn't work. The readers wouldn't understand what it meant. So we have to consider the context instead. This character is very upset and she kind of regrets the past, like a past action that she had or past thinking that she had. So in this case, we went with the English word crushed. So crushed means to feel completely disappointed, which is exactly the emotion that the character is feeling at that moment. So we just had to try to match the context based off of the original Korean.
맴짓이라는 말은 처음에 번역하기 전에 알아듣기도 힘들었을 것 같은데 어떻게 배우셨어요, 이 말을?
Well, actually, I asked my friends. So if there is ever any sound effects I don't understand, I do tend to ask my Korean friends just to kind of check what is this meaning exactly.
네.
But I could also tell from the scene itself. So I kind of understood that character's emotion. You know, there's something like happening to her heart, you know, to her feelings. So through that understanding, I kind of reached the conclusion that crushed would be best to fit this scene.
아, 그 친구분도 영어를 잘하시나 보죠?
Oh, of course.
네, 그것도 직역하면은 또 다른 의미로 또 받아들일 수 있을 텐데 친구분께서 설명을 잘 해주신 것 같네요. 네, 그리고 요즘에 웹툰들을 보면 제목이 굉장히 길고 특이한 것들이 많거든요. 이런 제목들은 어떻게 또 번역을 하시는지 궁금해요.
Of course. So when translating titles, there are two things that you have to keep in mind. And first, you have to keep the same feeling as the original Korean. So for example, for this title, 장르를 바꿔보도록 하겠습니다. The direct translation would be, I will make an attempt to change the genre. But this is really long and also very hard for English speakers to be attracted to. So our translation for this title ended up being The Villainess Flips the Script. So flip the script means to change something, to reverse something, to change one's story. So in this title fits exactly what the webtoon title was trying to say. The villainess is changing the story.
아, 확실히 단순해지니까 더 명확하게 잘 전달이 되는 것 같네요. 그렇다면 두 번째는 뭔가요?
So the second part to translating titles is you have to adapt it for the audience. So if you look at this example, 유부녀 killer, the direct translation would be a married woman killer. But it's unclear who exactly the killer is. Is the killer someone who kills married women? The readers could misunderstand the title in that way. So instead, we went with the title A Bona Fide Killer. English titles tend to be clearer. It tends to have an impact. You are able to understand like who the main character is and what this basic story is about. So bona fide means genuine or sincere or not counterfeit. And the main character, the actual killer in the webtoon, her name is Bona. So we put her name in the title using this phrase. And so it came out as, you know, Bona is a bona fide killer.
정말 영어권 독자들한테는 훨씬 더 직관적으로 다가올 수 있겠네요. 제목이야말로 정말 직역을 하면 그 느낌을 잘 살릴 수가 없을 텐데 정말 고도의 번역 능력이 요구되는 일이 아닌가 정말 대단한 일을 하고 계시는 것 같습니다. 자, 오늘 선생님 말씀을 쭉 들으면서 웹툰 번역에 대해서 어떻게 일을 하는지 쭉 들어봤는데요. 마지막으로 이 웹툰 번역가를 꿈꾸는 이들에게 하시고 싶은 말씀이 있으시다면 한 말씀 부탁드립니다.
There's a lot I want to say. But I guess the best thing is just to read a lot of webtoons in both languages. And if you really do enjoy Korean culture, I do think that webtoons is a great localization field to get into.
네, 뭐 어려운 점도 많지만 또 그만큼 매력적인 직업이 아닌가 싶은 생각이 드는데요. 자, 지금까지 웹툰 번역에 대해서 레티샤 웰스 선생님과 함께 이야기 나눠봤습니다. 오늘 좋은 말씀 해주셔서 고맙습니다.
Thank you.